Hi there. Tonight we wander into a tale where beauty becomes both a blessing and a curse, where temples echo with whispers, gods glare with jealousy, and one woman's face will someday cause heroes to break into a nervous sweat just at the mention of her name. Medusa. Imagine it. Cool marble floors under your feet, the flicker of oil lamps painting the shadows of winged statues on the walls, and a silence so heavy you could almost hear the gods listening in. That's the world where our story unfolds, and our star is not yet the terrifying Gorgon you've seen on vases and shields. She begins with soft hair, curious eyes, and the simple problem of being too dazzling for her own good. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to see how far our little community stretches across the world, and if there are any myths or fairy tales you'd love to hear in a future episode, drop it in the comments below. Now, let's begin our quiet journey. Medusa, she wasn't born with snakes in her hair. No, she wasn't even born with scales or fangs or that famous petrifying glare. She was in fact as human as you or me, though the poets would insist she was about 1,000 times prettier. And when poets insist on your beauty, things tend to go wrong. She was one of 3 sisters, the Gorgons. But unlike Stheno and Euryale, who were immortal from the start, Medusa was the fragile mortal one. You can imagine family dinners, 2 sisters never worrying about wrinkles or grey hairs, and poor Medusa just hoping olive oil would keep her skin glowing. Immortality, sibling rivalry, not fun at all. People said she was radiant, not the she looks nice in candlelight kind of radiant, more like, please stop, you're blinding us at midday radiant. Her hair shimmered like spun gold, her eyes carried the sea's shifting moods, and her laughter, well, let's just say if a sailor heard it, he might forget to steer the ship. Now in Greece, being beautiful was a bit like leaving bread out in the market. Eventually someone, mortal or divine, would come along and snatch it. Beauty was currency, power, and often punishment. Gods had a funny way of giving gifts with one hand while preparing chaos with the other. Medusa caught the attention of Athena, goddess of wisdom, strategy, weaving, and the occasional terrifying stare. Athena valued order and dignity in her temples. So when Medusa, bright as a sunrise, became one of her priestesses, people nodded approvingly. After all, who wouldn't want a face like that leading hymns beneath the marble columns? But beauty attracts more than polite nods. It draws storms. And one such storm arrived in the form of Poseidon, god of the sea, earthquakes, and generally bad timing. He saw Medusa. He wanted Medusa. And unfortunately for her, gods rarely ask politely when desire struck. One night, under the vaulted shadows of Athena's temple, Poseidon cornered her, waves crashing invisibly in the air, the salt of the sea clinging to her skin. The poets, perhaps out of fear of offending Poseidon, described the scene vaguely. Some say she was seduced, others say she was violated, but either way, it was not her choice. Medusa left that night no longer just a priestess, but the unwilling rival of a goddess. Now, here's where you'd expect Athena, the wise one, to show compassion, to protect her devoted follower, to punish the god who had trespassed in her sacred temple. But no. Athena looked down, saw her temple defiled, and decided to place the blame not on her seawater-soaked uncle, but on Medusa. Yes, poor mortal Medusa became the scapegoat of divine family politics. So Athena raised her hand, and beauty shattered into horror. Golden hair twisted into writhing snakes, soft eyes hardened into mirrors of stone. Her very presence turned flesh into marble. Imagine a face so captivating one day and so lethal the next. The irony was sharp enough to cut marble itself, and that, they say, was how Medusa became the monster, the outcast, the Gorgon. But if you listen closely, you'll hear another story, whispered beneath the polished lines of poets. A story where Medusa's curse was less of a punishment and more of a shield. For what better protection for a wronged woman than to have a gaze that could stop the world in its tracks? Picture her now, wandering the rocky edges of Greece, the moonlight catching her serpentine crown, every hiss of her hair like a lullaby of warning. The villagers feared her, but the owls, oh, the owls adored her. They'd perch on her shoulders without a care, their wide, unblinking eyes meeting hers with silent solidarity. Because really, what was stone to an owl who preferred perches anyway? Medusa's lair, if we can call it that, was no festering cave of nightmares. No, it was a quiet place of exile. Sea breezes slipping through cracks in the stone, flowers still daring to bloom at the edges, though admittedly they bloomed next to a suspicious number of marble statues that looked suspiciously like startled travellers. And here, in this solitude, she became legend, whispered about in taverns, painted on pottery, invoked by mothers who wanted their children to come home before dark. Don't wander too far, or Medusa will catch you, they said, which was perhaps unfair, considering Medusa hadn't asked to be anyone's bedtime threat. But stories grow like ivy, and soon heroes began to hear of her. Brave men who thought they could earn glory by cutting down a woman who only wanted peace. And here, dear listener, enters Perseus, the ambitious son of Zeus, who had a tendency to collect impossible quests the way fishermen collect excuses. He was sent to fetch Medusa's head, because nothing says heroic challenge like decapitating an already cursed, exiled woman minding her own business. Armed with Athena's shiny shield, Hermes' winged sandals, and a bag for head storage, yes, really a bag just for that, Perseus set off. But that is a tale for a little later, because first I want you to imagine Medusa again, sitting alone on a stone ledge, the snakes in her hair whispering soft secrets to her. Perhaps they comforted her, hissing lullabies when the nights grew long. Perhaps she laughed sometimes, remembering when laughter didn't frighten birds from the trees. Perhaps, just perhaps, she was not thinking of revenge, but simply of quiet, of peace, of a day when no one looked at her with fear or hunger or blame. And that, my dear listener, is where the heart of Medusa's story lies. Not in the glare, not in the blade, but in the space between beauty and terror, in the irony that the woman most feared for her power may have been the one who least desired it. Perseus. Yes, the young man with curls that probably took longer to style than his armor, the one chosen to march into the quiet exile of Medusa's life and return with her head neatly packaged. To him, it was not personal. It was just another quest to prove himself. But to the gods, oh, to the gods, this was theatre. Imagine the scene. Olympus leaning over the balcony of the sky like noisy neighbours. Zeus grinning like a proud father who can't resist showing off his son. Hermes fluttering about, already planning which sandals Perseus would borrow and never return. And Athena, arms crossed, pretending this was all a lesson in strategy, when really it was also about settling her grudge against Medusa. Perseus, poor thing, had no idea he was basically walking into a divine chess game where he was the pawn, though admittedly a very handsome pawn with good cheekbones. He was armed, of course, with a collection of gifts. Athena's polished shield so shiny you could fix your hair in it. Hermes' winged sandals, which made walking look more like hopping excitedly. And Hades' helm of invisibility, which frankly seemed a little overpowered, but no one ever accused the gods of playing fair. Meanwhile, down below, Medusa had no idea any of this was happening. She was still living her life quietly among the wild cliffs. The snakes in her hair occasionally squabbled over who got the warmest patch of sun. She'd sit by the water's edge, tracing shapes in the sand, perhaps thinking of the days when her reflection was not a thing to fear. The tragedy of Medusa is that while the world conspired against her, she herself only wanted to be left alone. But Perseus marched on, past villages where the people whispered warnings, past shrines where mothers clutched their children and begged the gods to keep the monster away. Though, between you and me, if anyone should have been begged to stay away, it was Perseus with his bag and sharpened sword. The journey was long, winding through forests where even the trees seemed to gossip about him, the olive groves shaking their leaves as though saying, "He's really going to try it, isn't he?" At night, Perseus would look at the stars, pretending to be brave, while secretly hoping the gods hadn't given him hand-me-down equipment that broke mid-battle. Now, the thing about facing Medusa was simple. Don't look at her directly. Sounds easy, right? But imagine fighting while staring at a reflection in a shield, hoping it's polished enough to show her and not just your own terrified face. If you've ever tried to walk across a room carrying wine while only looking in a mirror, you'll know the struggle. And here, gentle listener, is where fate tightened its strings. Because while Perseus was approaching, Medusa's life was carrying on as usual. A quiet meal of figs and bread, the hiss of serpents curling softly around her, a wind carrying salt from the sea into her cave. She was not preparing for war. She was not plotting revenge. She was simply existing. But existing, it seemed, was too much for the gods to allow. When Perseus finally reached her lair, silence wrapped the stones like a cloak. He stepped carefully, sandals hovering just above the ground, his shield raised like a mirror of destiny. And there she was, Medusa. Not the monstrous nightmare painted in taverns, not a creature of dripping fangs and fiery eyes, but a woman, weary, sitting alone in the half-light, snakes shifting lazily as though they too were half asleep. She looked almost peaceful, which of course made the whole business of slaying her even more ironic. Perseus crept closer, heart thudding like a drumbeat, shield trembling slightly though he'd never admit it, and with one swift motion he struck. The snakes hissed in chorus, a sound that must have echoed like thunder in his ears. And Medusa became still. Her head, with all its serpentine crown, fell into the bag prepared for it. The cave grew quiet once more, except for the faint rattle of wings as Hermes no doubt applauded from somewhere unseen. And just like that, the woman who had once been beauty itself, the priestess turned scapegoat, the exile turned monster, was reduced to a trophy in a hero's tale. But here's the thing, Medusa's story doesn't end with her death. Oh no, because in her final moment her legend grew even larger. From her blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, leaping into the sky with a neigh that startled even the stars, and also Chrysaor, the golden giant, who admittedly doesn't get invited into as many stories, perhaps because winged horses make better pottery decorations. Still, the fact remains. Even in death, Medusa created wonders. Perseus, meanwhile, had no idea what to do with a flying horse suddenly circling overhead. He clutched his bag tighter, probably muttering something about one problem at a time, and hurried back on his quest, oblivious to the fact that his victim's legacy had just taken flight. And here's the quiet irony. While Perseus was hailed as the hero, Medusa's image would spread far wider than his deeds. Her face was carved onto shields to ward off enemies, painted on doors to protect homes, whispered in charms to frighten away evil. She became both curse and guardian, both horror and protection, a paradox that outlived the man who struck her down. So perhaps, just perhaps, her curse was never truly a curse, but a transformation into something greater than mortality. Imagine her now, not as the weeping figure in exile, not as the severed head in a hero's bag, but as the watchful eyes on the shields of warriors, the fierce protector etched into stone, the goddess-like guardian whose story reminds us that beauty can be dangerous, and danger can sometimes be beautiful. And so, as Perseus sails away with his prize, we turn back to the cliffs where the sea still crashes, where flowers still bloom stubbornly beside marble statues, and where the whisper of snakes may still linger in the wind, a lullaby of defiance soft as moonlight, sharp as irony. Perseus sailed on, the waves carrying him gently, though he probably told everyone later that the sea had been stormy and dangerous. Heroes always do love to add a little thunder and lightning for dramatic effect, but in truth, the gods smoothed the waters for him, as if congratulating themselves for pulling off yet another theatrical tragedy. In his satchel, Medusa's head lay hidden, a quiet, terrible power tucked away like contraband. The snake, some say, still hissed softly, alive even after death. Others claimed her eyes, though closed, could still freeze the air if you dared to peek. Perseus did not dare. He was brave, yes, but not foolish. And besides, it was hard to row a boat while also worrying about accidental petrification. Now, here's where the story begins to twist again. Because the head of Medusa was not merely a gruesome trophy, it was a weapon, a divine tool. And Perseus, still barely more than a boy, suddenly carried in his bag the ability to turn kings and monsters into stone. Convenient, yes, but also, let's be honest, a little terrifying. On his way home, Perseus found himself entangled in more adventures than he probably wanted, because once you're the guy with a magic head in a bag, people tend to hand you extra errands. For instance, he encountered Atlas, the great titan cursed to hold up the sky on his shoulders. Imagine the poor giant, forever stuck beneath the crushing heavens, probably grumbling about back pain for all eternity. Perseus asked for shelter, but Atlas refused, not out of cruelty, but out of caution. He feared a prophecy that said a son of Zeus would one day steal his golden apples. So, Perseus did what Perseus did best. He reached into his satchel, drew out Medusa's head, and in a heartbeat, Atlas was stone, transformed into a towering mountain range, still holding the sky, but now silent, cold, and eternal. And that, dear listener, is why the Atlas Mountains stand in North Africa to this very day, or so the poets would like us to believe. Can you picture it? Medusa's legacy now stretching across continents, her face shaping the land itself. Every peak and ridge perhaps a reminder that even in death she refused to be forgotten. And the errands did not end there. Along his journey, Perseus stumbled upon the chained figure of Andromeda, poor princess left as a sacrifice to a sea monster, because of course, mortals love to solve their problems by offering up young women. Perseus, seeing her plight, decided this was the perfect moment to show off. He swooped in, used Medusa's head once more, and the sea monster froze mid-roar, stone teeth snapping shut forever in silence. Andromeda was saved. She gazed at Perseus with the wide-eyed admiration that myths always assign to rescued princesses, and before long she became his wife, though one has to wonder if she ever asked about the suspicious satchel he carried everywhere. Meanwhile, Medusa herself seemed to echo through each deed, her severed head becoming the real star of every story. Perseus may have been the wielder, but Medusa was the weapon, the protector, the force that shaped outcomes. Quietly, she stole the spotlight from the so-called hero, which is rather fitting, don't you think, considering how little of her life had been hers to control. Eventually, Perseus returned home, and what a homecoming it was, a banquet of shock, triumph, and accidental stonework. You see, Perseus had unfinished business. A certain king, Polydectes, who had sent him on the quest in the first place, hoping, quite frankly, that Perseus would never return. Polydectes had tried to pressure Perseus's mother into marriage, a story old as time, a powerful man cornering a woman, but now Perseus had Medusa's head, and with it, the perfect revenge. So when Perseus entered the hall where Polydectes and his courtiers feasted, he lifted the head, and in a single breath the entire court turned to stone. Goblets frozen mid-toast, robes stiffened into marble folds, mouths forever open in half-formed words, a silent gallery of his vengeance. And yet, even in that moment, it was not Perseus who had done the work. It was Medusa, her gaze still punishing arrogance, still defending the wronged, even if through the hand of the man who ended her life. The irony of Medusa's tale grows thicker with every turn. Her power was stolen, weaponized, paraded as the tool of men and gods alike, yet her image, her legend, remained the thing that endured, etched into shields, carved into temples, painted in vivid colours on pottery. The Gorgonean, as they called it, a mask of fear and protection, terrifying enemies, guarding allies. She had become, unwillingly, a goddess of warding, a curse turned into a blessing, though perhaps the cruelest blessing of all, because she could never choose how her power was used. Imagine her head now, resting on Athena's shield, the Aegis. Yes, the very goddess who cursed her took her face as a decoration, as if saying, "I'll take that, thank you very much." Athena strode into battle with Medusa's eyes glaring outward, armies trembling at the sight. Perhaps somewhere, deep in the silence of stone, Medusa's spirit smirked. "At least now, sister, I frighten them more than you do." And there lies the paradox. Medusa was punished for beauty, cursed for a violation not her fault, killed for being too dangerous, and finally worn as a badge of power by the very ones who had destroyed her. If tragedy were marble, her story would be the smoothest statue of all. And so, Perseus had played his part, kings turned to stone, monsters slain, a princess rescued. But as time moved on, his name began to fade, as so many heroes' names do, while Medusa's face, her eyes, her serpents, her paradox, only grew brighter in memory. Her image spread across the ancient world, the gates of temples to guard the faithful, pressed into coins that travelled from hand to hand, painted upon shields to terrify enemies before battle even began. The so-called monster became a symbol of protection, a face of horror, yes, but horror wielded for safety, a strange, inverted halo. People whispered her name as both a warning and a charm. Children were told not to stray too far at dusk lest the Gorgon catch them. but mothers also etched her likeness onto amulets to keep their little ones safe. Sailors painted her on their prows to frighten away storms. Farmers carved her into stones to protect their fields. She who had been cast out had, without choice, become guardian of all. Perhaps that is the final irony of Medusa's tale, that the gods tried to make her a punishment, men tried to make her a weapon, yet across centuries ordinary people made her a shield, a protector, even a quiet companion in their daily fears. So the next time you see her, in a museum, on a shield, or hidden in the pages of a story, do not think only of snakes and stone. Think of the girl who once served in Athena's temple, who laughed like sunlight on the sea, who carried beauty too bright for the gods to leave untouched. Medusa's curse was never simply her own. It was the world's, the weight of jealousy, fear, and power. And yet, through that curse, she became eternal. And if you listen closely in the hush of night, you might still hear her, the gentle hiss of serpents, the soft laughter of a woman who, in spite of everything, remains not a monster, but a legend. And perhaps that is where we should leave her. Yet stories are not obedient creatures. They never truly end where we expect, not at the clash of swords, not at the decree of gods, not even at the silence of death. They linger, like the scent of myrrh clinging to stone temples, like the salt taste of the sea that stays on the lips long after the tide retreats. Medusa's story lingered too, not as a neat moral tucked away in a hero's scroll, but as something stranger, more enduring. Imagine Athens at twilight, the agora buzzing with chatter as merchants closed their stalls, candles flickering in clay lamps, the air heavy with roasted figs and freshly crushed grapes. A mother hurries her child along whispering, "Stay close, little one, or the Gorgon will see you." But just around the corner another woman hangs a small amulet above her doorway, carved with Medusa's face, not to invite fear, but to keep fear away. The irony is thick enough to taste. The monster who was cursed for terrifying became the protector that people trusted most. These amulets, the Gorgonaea, spread everywhere. Coins bore her face, so that every exchange carried her watchful gaze. Shields were painted with her grin, so that enemies might flinch before the battle even began. Even the Parthenon itself once held her image, tucked among the sacred carvings, the stone guardian of Athena's temple. Yes, Athena, the very goddess who cursed her, kept her face as a symbol of power, as if the gods themselves could not quite erase what they had tried so hard to condemn. There is a curious tenderness in that, for Perseus may have sailed on, celebrated with songs and statues, and Athena may have polished her wisdom until it gleamed brighter than marble. But it was Medusa who clung quietly to the edges of memory, no longer the outcast in a lonely cave, but the silent guardian of homes, ships, and fields. The more people tried to forget her, the more they carved her into stone. Picture a farmer in a small village, weary after a long day beneath the sun. He hangs a painted tile of Medusa at the edge of his vineyard to frighten away thieves and mischievous spirits. He has no temple, no altar, no hymns, only that watchful face staring from the vines. And somehow, it feels enough, perhaps even comforting. Or a sailor, packing provisions for a long voyage. He tucks a coin stamped with Medusa's head into his belt, not because it will buy him anything on the waves, but because he believes her eyes will keep storms away. He does not see a monster, he sees a guardian, a companion across the restless sea. It is strange how curses sometimes twist into blessings, how punishment sometimes transforms into protection. And perhaps this was Medusa's truest revenge, not to rise again with serpents blazing, not to haunt heroes in their dreams, but simply to endure, to become indispensable, to be everywhere, quietly. Centuries rolled forward, and still her face appeared, carved into Roman mosaics, painted by Renaissance masters who could not resist her tragic allure. Each age tried to reshape her: monster, victim, beauty, protector, and yet through every version she remained. Serpents curled like living crowns, eyes that dared to look straight into ours. Close your eyes for a moment. Can you hear her still? The soft hiss of leaves in the evening breeze, the steady rhythm of waves against distant rocks, the low hum of cicadas in the night, all small reminders that she is never truly gone. And maybe that is the gentlest justice of all. For the gods can thunder and command, heroes can fight and conquer, but it is memory, quiet, stubborn, human memory, that chooses who lives forever. So let us not leave her as a severed head in a hero's satchel, nor as a punishment whispered by a jealous goddess. Let us leave her instead as a figure seated in the moonlight, the serpents upon her head no longer striking, but resting like soft braids, her eyes not blazing with fury. She is no longer feared, no longer hunted, only remembered.